In the harsh winter of 1887, a freezing nurse waits alone at a desolate train station, her future uncertain. But when a wealthy cowboy on horseback rides in, their chance encounter sparks a love story that would change both of their lives forever. From the icy winds of Wyoming to the warmth of a life built together, follow Jack and Libby as they navigate the unforgiving Wild West, overcoming trials and finding something far more precious than they ever imagined. Will their love survive the challenges of a tough frontier? You won't want to miss a moment of their incredible journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. The winter of 1887 arrived in Wyoming with an unforgiving force. The winds howled through the prairie, carrying the biting cold that could freeze even the strongest of men. The small town of Cheyenne, usually bustling with activity, was quiet under the blanket of snow. The train station, usually a place of hope and connection, was now deserted, save for a lone figure sitting on a cold, wooden bench. Elizabeth "Libby" Montgomery sat there, her breath foaming white clouds in the frigid air. Her thin shawl did little to protect her from the brutal cold. Her fingers were numb, her lips blue from the freezing temperatures. Hours had passed since the last train left for the east, and the next one wouldn't come until morning, if the storm didn't block the tracks. Libby, with nothing left but a small leather bag containing all her worldly possessions, sat in silence, wondering if she would freeze to death before the dawn. Libby had been a nurse in Philadelphia, working in a charity hospital where she'd seen everything from delivering babies to tending to the dying. But when a scandal broke, and a respected doctor tried to force himself upon her, the hospital dismissed her. No one believed her. She had fought back, breaking his nose with a bedpan. But it didn't matter. Her career was over. Word spread like wildfire, and no respectable hospital would hire her after that. With little money left, she bought a one-way ticket west, hoping to find work in one of the mining towns. But her money ran out in Cheyenne, and the boarding house turned her away. Now, she had nothing, not even a place to sleep. She clutched the leather bag tightly, the only thing of value she had left. Her dreams, once filled with hope, now seemed as cold as the night itself. With each passing minute, she feared that her story would end right here, in this freezing train station, forgotten by the world. Then, the sound of horse hooves echoed through the storm, breaking her thoughts. Libby looked up, her eyes straining to make out the figure through the swirling snow. A man on horseback was approaching, his silhouette dark against the white landscape. As the figure drew closer, Libby could see that he was a tall man, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low to protect him from the wind. His horse was magnificent, a black stallion with powerful strides. The man dismounted with ease, tying his horse to the hitching post before making his way toward the station. His boots were expensive leather, and he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to power. As he entered the station, the door swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind and snow. "Evening, miss," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, warm, and tinged with a slight drawl. "Mighty cold night to be sitting out here alone." Libby's teeth were chattering too hard to speak, but she managed a small nod. She could see the concern in his eyes as he studied her, taking in the way she was dressed. Her clothes were of good quality, though worn. Her medical bag sat beside her, a small but valuable possession. "Name's Jackson Thornton," the man said, his eyes softening. "I own the Double T Ranch, about 20 miles north of here. Been in town on business, heading home now." Libby's heart skipped a beat as she looked up at him, noticing the gentleness in his manner despite his obvious strength. She was used to being on her own, learning to trust no one. But something about this man was different. He didn't look at her with the judgmental eyes she had come to expect from men in her past. There was kindness in his gaze. "Are you a doctor, miss?" he asked gently, his eyes falling on her medical bag. "A nurse," Libby whispered, her voice shaky. "Elizabeth Montgomery from Philadelphia." Jack's eyes widened. A trained nurse was rare in Wyoming territory, where most towns were lucky to have a barber who could pull teeth, let alone tend to the wounded. "You're going to freeze to death if you stay here much longer," Jack said, concern lacing his words. "This station isn't heated. Please, let me take you somewhere warm." Libby hesitated. She had learned long ago not to trust men easily. But there was something about Jack Thornton, a sense of sincerity in his words, a gentleness in his tone, that made her want to believe him. She had no money, no other options. I don't have money for a hotel, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Jack smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. That's not your concern right now. Getting you warm and fed is what matters. We'll sort out the rest later. Without waiting for a response, Jack shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth from his body lingered in the coat, offering her a relief she hadn't known for hours. Libby gasped in relief, the heat seeping into her frozen bones. She had never felt anything so comforting. Can you walk? Jack asked softly. Libby tried to stand but found her legs too stiff from the cold. Before she could protest, Jack scooped her up in his arms, her medical bag included. She was light as a feather, trembling like a leaf in the wind. The hotel's just across the street, Jack said, carrying her out into the storm. We'll get you warmed up, and then you can tell me what brings a trained nurse to Wyoming in the middle of winter. For the first time in months, Libby didn't feel the crushing weight of fear. As Jack held her close, she found herself pressed against his strong chest. His arms, firm but gentle, gave her a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. As they stepped out into the storm, the cold no longer seemed to matter. For the first time in a long while, Libby felt like she wasn't alone. And she wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she had hope. Libby had barely managed to register the warmth of the hotel when Jack carried her through the lobby. She was still too numb to think clearly, but the soft glow of the fire and the friendly hum of the hotel staff brought a feeling of comfort. Every eye in the lobby turned toward them as Jack, still holding her in his arms, made his way toward the desk. The hotel clerk, a thin man with a worried look, hurried over. Mr. Thornton, sir, what happened? I found this lady at the train station, Jack said, his voice filled with concern. She was frozen, near death. I need your best room, and send up hot food, coffee, and plenty of blankets. Also, get Dr. Williams if he's still in town. Right away, sir, the clerk said, grabbing a key from the board. Room 12, second floor. Should I help carry her? I've got her, Jack said firmly, moving toward the stairs. Libby, her limbs tingling as warmth returned to her body, was barely aware of the whispers around her as Jack carried her up the stairs. She didn't care about her reputation anymore. She was too exhausted to think about anything other than the warmth that was gradually returning to her hands and feet. Jack set her down in the spacious room, which was filled with fine furniture, a large bed, and a crackling fireplace. He moved quickly, tending to the fire, ensuring it blazed brightly. The hotel will send up some clothes for you, he said, not looking at her as he worked. Your clothes are damp from the snow. We need to get you warm and dry. A knock at the door interrupted them. Jack answered it and quickly returned with a tray of hot food and coffee. He handed her a cup with careful hands, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. Drink this slowly, he advised. Too much heat too quickly can be dangerous. Libby sipped the coffee gratefully, the warmth spreading through her chest. She felt alive again, her strength returning with each sip. You seem to know something about medicine yourself, she said, her voice growing stronger. Jack smiled but didn't answer. Instead, he sat down across from her. I may not be a trained nurse, but out here, you learn a few things. Ranching's tough, and the nearest doctor might be 100 miles away. Libby smiled faintly. That's a skill most people would never consider. How did you end up here? Jack asked after a moment, his voice gentle, but with an underlying curiosity. The room fell quiet as Libby gathered her thoughts. She had learned not to trust people, but something in Jack's eyes, something that seemed genuinely kind and interested, made her feel like sharing her past. Libby hesitated for a moment, her eyes tracing the flickering flames in the hearth. The warmth from the fire made her feel safer than she had in weeks, but the conversation she was about to have would uncover painful memories. I worked in a hospital in Philadelphia, she began slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. But there was trouble. A doctor tried to force himself on me. I fought back. Broke his nose with a bedpan. Jack's jaw tightened, and she could see the anger flash in his eyes, though he said nothing. His hand gripped the armrest of the chair. I had hoped that moving west, away from everything, would give me a chance to start over. But the story followed me, and no one would hire me. Not even the hospitals in the smaller towns. I had nowhere else to go. So, I came west hoping for a chance." Her voice cracked as she finished, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, and Jack studied her intently, his face a mixture of empathy and respect. "That man, he's a coward," Jack said finally, his voice low but firm. "And I don't care about any of that. You're a trained nurse, and that's all that matters out here." He looked at her, his eyes sincere. "You deserve better than what you've been through." Libby managed a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. She had told herself for years that her past would never be erased, but Jack's words were a balm she hadn't known she needed. There was a knock at the door, and a hotel maid entered, her arms full of clothing. "Begging your pardon, sir," the maid said, nodding at Jack before turning to Libby. "These are the finest we have. Mrs. Patterson and her roommate donated them." "Thank Mrs. Patterson for her kindness," Jack said as he took the clothes from the maid's arms. He turned to Libby. "I'll wait downstairs while you change." As he left the room, Libby sat for a moment, holding the clothes in her lap. She had expected to feel embarrassed, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she was grateful. Grateful for the kindness she had been shown, for the safety she had found in this strange, remote place. She quickly changed into the warm, well-made dress and boots, noticing how much better they fit her than any clothes she had worn in a long time. Jack returned moments later, and his face lit up when he saw her. "You look better already," he said, his voice soft with approval. Libby felt a flush of warmth spread across her cheeks, but it wasn't from the clothes. It was from the way Jack was looking at her, his gaze kind, appreciative, and something more. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly. "I don't know how to repay you." Jack smiled again, a smile that was filled with something deeper now. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Montgomery, but I was hoping we could talk about your plans." Libby furrowed her brow, still unsure of her next steps. "Plans?" Jack hesitated for just a moment, then spoke with quiet certainty. "I own a ranch about 20 miles north of here. The Double T. It's a big operation, and the men work hard. They're constantly getting hurt. We have cattle to tend, horses to care for, and every season brings its own injuries. I need someone like you. Someone who's trained and capable." Libby's eyes widened in surprise. "You want me to come work on your ranch?" "I'm offering you a position as the ranch nurse," Jack said, his voice steady and clear. "Good pay, comfortable quarters, and all the medical supplies you need. You'd have your own cabin near the main house, and the cook would make sure you're well fed." Libby stood there, caught off guard. It sounded too perfect, too good to be true. "And in return?" she asked carefully, studying him for any hint of hidden motives. "Honest work for honest pay," Jack replied. "You tend to the men when they're hurt, assist in difficult births among the livestock when needed, and perhaps even teach the hands basic first aid. Nothing more than that." Libby searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. His expression was open, kind, and respectful. He wasn't asking for anything more than her skills and her time. "You wouldn't expect anything personal?" she asked, still cautious. Jack's gaze softened, and he shook his head. "I'm not the kind of man who would take advantage of a woman's vulnerable position. If something personal were to develop between us, it would be because we both wanted it. Not because you felt obligated." Libby studied him, her heart still guarded. But there was something about Jack, something that made her want to trust him. "How far is the ranch?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "About 20 miles north," Jack answered, his voice proud. "The Double T is one of the largest cattle ranches in the territory. We raise cattle and horses, some of the finest in Wyoming." Libby felt a spark of hope. This could be her chance. A new life, a fresh start in a place where no one knew her past. A place where she could use her skills to help people who needed it, without the weight of judgment hanging over her head. "What would I expect?" she asked. Jack's eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement. "Expect hard work. Expect to be the only woman on the ranch most of the time. The men work hard, and they're a tough bunch, but they're good people. You'll have your own cabin, and I'll make sure you're well taken care of." Libby felt a sense of determination rising in her. This was her opportunity. She had nothing left to lose. She looked at Jack, her decision clear in her heart. "I'll give it a try," she said carefully. "If it doesn't work out, I'll move on. No hard feelings." Jack's smile was wide and sincere. "Welcome to the Double T, Nurse Montgomery." As Jack extended his hand, Libby shook it, feeling a spark of electricity pass between them. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt the possibility of a new beginning. A chance to prove herself, to heal, and to perhaps even find something she hadn't been looking for: love. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast that Libby barely had the appetite to eat, Jack led her to the stable, where horses were waiting for the journey to the Double T. He had bought her new, sturdy riding boots, a warm coat, and other necessities to ensure her comfort on the journey. Libby hesitated for a moment, thinking of how little she had known just days before. Now, she was about to begin a new chapter, and she wasn't sure what to expect. "You ready?" Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with a quiet excitement. Libby nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." They rode together, side by side, through the Wyoming wilderness. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a sparkling white landscape that took Libby's breath away. Snow-capped mountains rose in the distance, and the endless sky stretched out before her. As they rode toward the Double T Ranch, Libby couldn't help but feel a sense of freedom. This land, vast and untamed, felt like a place she could belong. A place where she could leave the past behind and build something new. As they neared the ranch, Jack pointed out landmarks along the way: a grove of cottonwood trees, a creek where they watered their horses, and finally, the boundary markers of the ranch itself. "There she is," Jack said proudly, gesturing toward the sprawling ranch below. "The Double T." Libby gasped in awe. The ranch spread out across a valley like a small town, with a large, well-built main house, a bunkhouse, stables, a blacksmith shop, and various other outbuildings. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Libby could see men working despite the cold weather. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until spring," Jack said with a grin. "When the grass is green and the wildflowers bloom, there's no prettier sight in Wyoming." As they rode into the ranch yard, several of the ranch hands emerged from various buildings. Word had clearly spread about Jack's trip to town, and the men were curious about the woman riding alongside their boss. "Boys," Jack called out as he dismounted, "I want you to meet Miss Elizabeth Montgomery. She's our new nurse." A cheer went up from the men, and Libby felt her cheeks flush. One of the ranch hands, an older man with graying whiskers, stepped forward. "Name's Tom Bradley, Mississippi. I'm the foreman here. Can't tell you how glad we are to have someone with medical training around." Libby smiled, feeling a sense of belonging that she hadn't felt in a long time. "I hope I can be of help," she said softly. Jack helped her dismount and led her toward a small but well-built cabin about 50 yards from the main house. "This will be your home," he said, opening the door. Libby stepped inside, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and awe. This was hers. Jack had already arranged for the cabin to be furnished. It was simple, but cozy, just what she needed. The main room doubled as her living area and office, with a small bedroom and a kitchen with a wood stove. The cabin was warm, with a fire already crackling in the fireplace. It was perfect. "You've done more than enough, Jack," Libby said, turning to him with a soft smile. Jack smiled back, his eyes filled with warmth. "It's what you deserve, Miss Montgomery. You'll be safe here. We'll take care of you." Libby moved to the window and gazed out at the view, feeling a sense of peace that had long eluded her. This was her new life, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The next few days at the Double T Ranch were a whirlwind of new faces, hard work, and a growing sense of belonging. Libby quickly settled into her new role, meeting the men who worked for Jack. They were rough around the edges, but there was a respect in their eyes when they saw her medical skills. Most of them had never been treated by a trained nurse before, and Libby found herself patching up wounds, tending to the occasional fever, and even offering advice on basic first aid. Though it was difficult work, Libby found solace in it. The days were long, and the ranch was always busy, but there was something grounding about the rhythm of ranch life. She could focus on helping the men, knowing that she was needed. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful, and Libby began to feel like she had a purpose again. One afternoon, As she was stitching up a wound on one of the ranch hands, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Jack. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work with an intensity that made her pause for a moment. "You're doing good work here, Miss Montgomery," Jack said, his voice low but filled with admiration. Libby looked up, meeting his gaze. For a moment, there was silence between them, and she felt something shift in the air. The connection they had shared since their first meeting seemed to be growing deeper, though neither of them spoke of it. "Thank you, Jack," she replied softly, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I'm just doing what I was trained to do." Jack smiled, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes, something unspoken. "Is there anything I can do to help you?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. Libby shook her head, focusing back on the wound she was finishing. "No, I'm fine. But thank you." Jack stood there for a moment longer, watching her work, before nodding and turning to leave. "If you need anything, you know where to find me," he said, his voice warm but distant, like he was holding something back. Libby continued working, but her mind wandered. There was something in Jack's eyes, something that made her heart skip. It was clear he respected her as a nurse, but was there more to it? Did he feel the same pull she did? The days stretched on, and Libby continued to grow more comfortable at the ranch. She found herself looking forward to the small moments with Jack, the times when their eyes would meet across a crowded room or when they would share a quiet conversation as they worked side by side. But despite the obvious chemistry between them, neither of them had crossed that line. It seemed that both were waiting for something to push them forward, or perhaps something to hold them back. One evening, as Libby sat in her cabin after a long day, there was a soft knock at the door. She stood up, wiping her hands on a towel, and opened it to find Jack standing there, holding a steaming mug in his hands. "Thought you might like some hot chocolate before bed," he said, his voice warm and comforting, like it always was. "Martha makes the best in Wyoming." Libby smiled, her heart skipping a beat at the simple kindness. "That's very thoughtful of you, Jack. Please, come in." He stepped inside, and Libby closed the door behind him. The room was small, but cozy, and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. She gestured to the chair near the fire, and Jack sat down, placing the mug on the small table in front of him. "Thank you," Libby said, taking the mug from the table and inhaling the sweet, rich scent of chocolate. "It's been a long day." Jack nodded, watching her carefully as she took a sip of the hot chocolate. "You've been working hard," he said softly. "I see how much you're doing for the men here. They respect you." Libby set the mug down, her eyes meeting his. "I'm just doing what I was hired to do." Jack leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. "You're doing much more than that, Libby. You're making a difference here. You've saved lives. You've given people hope. You've earned that respect." Libby felt a warmth spreading through her at his words, but she didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to receiving such praise. Back in Philadelphia, she had only been seen as a woman doing a man's job. But here, in this strange and rugged place, she was valued for her skills, her dedication. "I'm just doing my best," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Jack smiled at her, a soft, knowing smile. "That's all anyone can do. But I see more in you, Libby. I see someone who's not just surviving, but thriving. You've found your place here. And I'm glad you're here." Libby's heart fluttered in her chest at his words, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw something more in his eyes, something beyond respect. But before she could speak, Jack stood up, his expression shifting back to something more neutral. "I'll let you get some rest," he said, his voice slightly gruff again. "We've got a busy day tomorrow." Libby nodded, still caught in the warmth of the moment. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." He gave her a final look, his gaze lingering just a moment longer before he turned and left, leaving her standing there with her heart racing and thoughts swirling. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Being at the Double T Ranch, surrounded by these people, with Jack by her side, felt like the beginning of something new, something she had longed for. The morning sun broke through the towering mountain peaks, casting a golden light over the sprawling landscape of the Double T Ranch. Libby stood at the edge of her cabin, her heart fluttering with anticipation. She had received Jack's invitation the night before to join him on a ride to the North Fields. She hadn't known what to expect, But something about the way he had looked at her made her feel that today would be different. Libby saddled her horse and adjusted her coat, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. The chill didn't bother her as much as it had when she first arrived. Now, it felt more like an embrace, a reminder of the strength and resilience that the Wyoming landscape demanded. As she walked toward the stable, she saw Jack, already mounted on his own horse. He was waiting for her by the wooden fence, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the sky. "Ready to see the North Fields?" Jack asked, his voice steady, but with a hint of something softer that she couldn't quite place. Libby nodded, trying to steady the nerves that had suddenly crept up on her. "Ready as I'll ever be." They set off together, riding side by side through the ranch's vast property. The land stretched out before them, endless and untamed, just like the possibilities that lay ahead. As they passed through the open fields, Libby couldn't help but admire the beauty of it all. The snow from earlier in the season had begun to melt, revealing patches of green grass. The cattle grazed lazily in the distance, and the sound of hooves against the earth created a rhythmic melody that filled the silence between them. Jack occasionally pointed out landmarks, describing the land as if it were a part of him, each ridge and stream holding a memory. Libby listened closely, fascinated by his deep connection to the ranch. He spoke with such pride, and there was an honesty in his words that made her feel both welcome and at home. "I've always loved this land," Jack said after a while, his voice quiet but full of emotion. "My father built this place from the ground up. He believed in the land. I guess I inherited that from him." Libby glanced at him, noticing the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of his father. "You've built something special here, Jack." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It hasn't always been easy. Nothing ever is. But it's ours. And that's what matters." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wind carrying their thoughts away. Libby felt a strange sense of peace as they made their way deeper into the North Fields. She had never imagined that she would find a place like this. The ranch was more than just a job for her now. It felt like a refuge, a place where she could be herself without fear of judgment. And Jack, there was something about him that made her feel safe, protected, even. As they reached a small grove of cottonwood trees, Jack halted his horse and looked over at her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about you, about this ranch, about what comes next." Libby's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was the moment or the words themselves, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack dismounted, tying his horse to one of the trees. He walked over to her, his boots crunching in the grass as he approached. "I've been running this ranch for years, but there's always been something missing. It's not the land, or the cattle, or even the money. It's having someone to share it with." Libby's breath caught in her throat. Was he really saying what she thought he was saying? "You've been that someone, Libby," Jack continued, his voice soft but filled with determination. "You've brought something to this place that it's been lacking. You've brought life. And I don't want to go another day without knowing where we stand. I need to know if you feel the same way." Libby's heart raced. She had been holding on to her emotions, not wanting to let herself believe that anything could come of this. But now, with Jack standing in front of her, his gaze steady and filled with sincerity, she realized she couldn't deny it any longer. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I do feel the same way. More than I can say." Jack's expression softened, his relief palpable. "I've wanted to hear that for a long time," he said, his voice filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "You've made me believe in something more than just this ranch. More than just work. You've made me believe in love again, Libby." Libby reached out, her fingers brushing his hand gently. The connection between them was undeniable now, the air thick with everything they had been holding back. They were no longer just two people bound by circumstance. They were something more, something real. Before she could say anything else, Jack leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His lips hovered near hers, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in time. She could feel the warmth of his breath, could feel the thundering of her own heartbeat. Then, as if the world was finally aligning, Jack kissed her. It was soft at first, hesitant, as though he was asking for permission. But Libby kissed him back with equal fervor, the flood of emotions she had been hiding pouring out in that one moment. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless, their hearts beating in sync. Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with something deeper than just affection. "I'm not going anywhere, Libby. Not without you." Libby's smile was slow, but it reached her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere either, Jack." The North Field seemed to stretch on forever around them, but for the first time, Libby felt that she had truly found her place. Not just in the land or the ranch, but with Jack, by his side. As the days passed, the bond between Libby and Jack grew stronger. The ranch was busy with preparations for the upcoming cattle drive, and Libby continued to care for the men, always finding new ways to make their lives easier. But her relationship with Jack was shifting into something more than either of them had expected. They spent more time together, discussing plans for the ranch, but also talking about their dreams, their pasts, and everything in between. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the main house after dinner, Jack turned to Libby with a serious expression. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice softer than usual. "About what this means. And I want you to know, this isn't just some passing fling. I care about you, Libby. I'm in this for the long haul." Libby's heart warmed at his words, but she couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. She had been hurt before, and the thought of allowing herself to be vulnerable again was terrifying. "I care about you too, Jack," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. "But I don't want to rush into anything. Not after everything I've been through." Jack reached out, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. "We'll take this as slow as you need, Libby. There's no rush. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Libby nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't ready to commit fully just yet, but she could see the sincerity in Jack's eyes. And that was enough for now. For the first time in years, she felt like she could trust someone again. The days ahead were filled with the hustle and bustle of ranch life, but as they worked side by side, Libby and Jack grew closer. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed to fade away, Libby couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold for them. Whatever it was, she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. The seasons shifted, and the Double T Ranch began to feel like home for Libby. Winter had long passed, and spring was in the air, bringing with it a renewed sense of hope and possibility. The days were longer, the nights warmer, and the work on the ranch seemed to go on endlessly. But it was in the midst of this busy life that a new challenge arose. A nearby ranch had suffered an outbreak of cattle fever, and the news spread like wildfire. The ranchers in the area were nervous, fearing that the disease would spread to their herds. Jack, always the protector of his land and his people, decided to take matters into his own hands and send a team to help. Libby was quick to offer her help. She knew that the situation was dire, and her medical expertise would be crucial in preventing further damage. But Jack, ever protective, was hesitant. He had come to care for her deeply, and the idea of her risking her health made him uneasy. "Libby, I don't want you to go," Jack said one evening as they sat in the warmth of the firelight. His voice was strained, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Libby, who had been preparing her medical supplies for the journey, looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Jack, I know how dangerous this is, but I'm the best person for the job. The ranch needs me, and so do those cattle." "I need you here," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've grown used to having you around, and I don't want to lose you." Libby felt her heart clench. She had come to care for Jack just as deeply, but she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. She had a duty to her skills, her work, and the people around her. "I'm not going to let anything happen to me, Jack. I've dealt with worse." Jack stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair, frustration written across his face. "It's not about what happens to you. It's about what happens to me if something does." Libby took a deep breath, standing to face him. "I understand, Jack. But I have to do this. It's what I'm trained to do, and it's the right thing." For a long moment, Jack didn't speak. His eyes met hers, filled with an intensity that made her heart race. She could see the conflict within him, torn between his protective instincts and his understanding of her need to do what was right. Slowly, Jack closed the distance between them, his large hand gently cupping her face. "I just need you to promise me something," Jack said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me that you won't take unnecessary risks." Libby's eyes softened, and she nodded. "I promise." With a sigh of relief, Jack pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if he never wanted to let her go. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Libby." "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, holding him just as tightly. The next day, Libby prepared for the journey to the neighboring ranch. Jack saw her off with a mixture of pride and worry in his eyes. He knew that he couldn't keep her sheltered forever. This was her calling, and he would have to trust her to do what was necessary. As Libby rode out of the ranch gates, she felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. It wasn't just the disease she was about to face, it was the fear of what might happen if things went wrong. But she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task ahead. She had a job to do. The ride to the neighboring ranch was long and treacherous. The roads were muddy from the spring thaw, and the skies above were thick with clouds. Libby kept her horse at a steady pace, her mind focused on the task ahead. She had been through more difficult situations than this. She could handle whatever came her way. When she finally arrived, the sight was grim. Cattle lay sick in the fields, some too weak to stand. The ranch hands were working tirelessly to care for them, but the disease was spreading quickly. Libby wasted no time. She set up her medical supplies and began examining the animals, offering whatever relief she could. As the day wore on, Libby worked tirelessly, her hands steady and sure as she treated the sick cattle. It was hard work, physically demanding, and emotionally draining. But she didn't stop. She knew that the ranchers were depending on her, and she would do everything in her power to save the cattle. Late that evening, when the sky had darkened and the wind had begun to howl, Libby finally took a moment to catch her breath. She sat on a bale of hay, her tired body aching, and looked out over the fields. She had made a difference. But there was still so much more to do. That's when she heard the sound of hooves in the distance. A rider was approaching. Libby stood up, wiping the sweat from her brow, and watched as the rider came closer. As the rider neared, she saw that it was Jack. He had come after her. He dismounted quickly, his face filled with concern. "I couldn't wait any longer," he said, his voice rough from the ride. "I had to make sure you were all right." Libby smiled softly, grateful for his concern but also touched by the depth of his feelings. "I'm fine, Jack. I told you I could handle this." He walked toward her, his gaze softening as he took in the exhaustion in her face. "You're doing more than handling it. You're saving lives." Libby shook her head, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm doing what I'm supposed to do." Jack reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'll stay here with you. If you need help, I'm not going anywhere." Libby's heart swelled at the sight of him. He had come all this way, risking everything just to make sure she was okay. And in that moment, Libby realized that no matter where life took her, she would never be alone. Jack would always be there, by her side. As the storm raged outside, Libby and Jack worked together, side by side, to save the sick cattle. And in that moment, amidst the chaos and the uncertainty, they both knew that their bond had grown even stronger. Their future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face whatever came next together. The days at the neighboring ranch passed quickly, and with Jack's help, the cattle fever was eventually contained. Libby had saved many animals, and the ranchers were deeply grateful. The storm outside had subsided, and the weather had begun to clear, signaling the arrival of spring. The world outside felt renewed, just as their relationship had. When Libby and Jack finally returned to the Double T, the ranch seemed different. There was a new sense of hope in the air, a new energy that came from knowing that they had faced something together and had come out stronger for it. The men at the ranch had watched Jack's determination as he came to check on Libby, and their respect for both of them had deepened. Over the following weeks, Jack and Libby found themselves growing closer, their connection undeniable. They would spend more time together, not just in the barn or the fields, but in quiet moments on the porch, watching the sunsets or simply sitting together in the stillness of the evening. Jack never rushed her, never pressured her. He respected her, admired her, and his feelings for her deepened with every passing day. And Libby, though she still carried the scars of her past, found herself falling for Jack in ways she hadn't expected. He was kind, strong, and patient, and with him, she felt safe. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the air warm and gentle around them, Jack turned to her with a soft smile. "I know we've been through a lot," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I want you to know, Libby, that I'm not going anywhere. You and me, we're in this together, for the long haul." Libby smiled, her heart full. "I feel the same way, Jack. I'm here, with you." And in that moment, under the stars, Libby knew that whatever challenges they faced next, they would face them side by side, with love and strength to carry them through. Months passed, and the rhythms of ranch life continued as usual. The fields began to green with the promise of summer, and the cattle thrived under the careful attention of the men at the Double T Ranch. Libby and Jack's partnership grew stronger, both in their work and in the quiet moments they shared. Yet, despite everything they had already built together, Jack knew it was time to take the next step. The time had come for him to ask Libby the question that had been weighing on his heart for so long. It happened one evening, as the sky turned brilliant hues of orange and pink, and the distant mountains were bathed in the soft glow of sunset. Jack had been quiet all day, as if he were waiting for the right moment to say something important. Libby, content with the day's work and the calm of the evening, sat on the porch, her back resting against the wooden railing, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Jack joined her, sitting beside her, his eyes watching her carefully. There was a familiar, quiet intensity in his gaze, one she had seen many times, but tonight it was different. Tonight, she could feel something change in the air between them. "Libby," Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned to look at him, sensing that tonight was unlike any other. "Jack, what is it?" He took a deep breath, his gaze locked with hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to still around them. "I've been thinking about us," he said. "About everything we've built together. The ranch, the work we've done, the life we've shared so far. And I can't help but feel like there's still something missing. Something I've been waiting to ask you." Libby's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was coming, but the words were still hard to grasp. She had always wondered if Jack saw her as more than just his nurse, his partner on the ranch. And now, as the evening light bathed them both, she knew. Jack took her hand in his, the roughness of his palm warm against her skin. "Libby, from the moment I found you at that train station, I knew you were someone special. You've given me something I never thought I'd find. Someone who truly understands me, who shares my love for this land, and who I can trust with everything I have. What I'm trying to say, Libby, is that I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Not now, not ever." Libby felt a rush of emotion welling up inside her. She squeezed his hand gently, her voice shaking just a little. "Jack, I feel the same way. You've become my world." Jack smiled at her, his eyes softening, but there was still something determined in his expression. "Then will you make me the happiest man in Wyoming?" he asked, his voice full of love and hope. "Libby Montgomery, will you marry me?" For a moment, Libby could only stare at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never expected to find love in this wild, untamed place, but here she was, sitting on the porch of the ranch she had come to love, with a man who had become her everything. She had feared that love would never find her after all she had been through, but now, with Jack, she realized it was exactly what she had needed all along. A smile spread across her face, and she leaned forward to kiss him, her answer clear in her heart. When she pulled back, her eyes sparkled with tears of joy. "Yes, Jack. Yes, I'll marry you." Jack's face lit up with an expression of pure happiness, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. The world around them seemed to fade away as they stood there together, surrounded by the beauty of the land they had both come to cherish. Jack pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "I can't believe this is really happening." Libby chuckled softly, looking up at him with love in her eyes. "It's happening, and I'm glad it is." As the sun set behind them, casting a final golden light over the ranch, Libby and Jack stood together, knowing that their future was just beginning. Their love story had taken many turns, filled with hardships, challenges, and triumphs. But in that moment, surrounded by the land they had both come to call home, they knew that they had found their place with each other, and nothing could stand in their way. The wedding preparations began almost immediately. Word spread quickly throughout the ranch and the neighboring towns. Everyone who knew Jack and Libby was thrilled by the news. The workers at the Double T Ranch, who had come to respect Libby as both a nurse and a partner, were especially excited. They had witnessed the growing love between their boss and the woman who had saved so many of their lives. The entire ranch seemed to buzz with energy as the day approached. Libby spent the days leading up to the wedding in a daze. She had never dreamed of a big, fancy wedding. She had imagined something simple, perhaps in a quiet church or even under the wide open sky, surrounded by the people who had supported her along the way. But Jack insisted on making it special, and Libby couldn't argue with him. He wanted their wedding to be as grand as the love they shared, and she couldn't help but be swept up in his enthusiasm. On the day of the wedding, the ranch was alive with activity. The barn had been transformed into a beautiful venue, decorated with wildflowers, candles, and rustic charm. The guests arrived from near and far, cowboys from neighboring ranches, ranch hands from the Double T, and even some of Jack's business associates from Denver. The ceremony was set to take place on the porch of the main house, overlooking the sprawling fields of the ranch. Libby stood in front of the mirror in her small cabin, staring at her reflection. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, a gown made of ivory silk that Martha, the cook's wife, had helped design. Wildflowers from the ranch were woven into her hair, giving her a rustic yet ethereal appearance. For a moment, she hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the woman who had arrived at Cheyenne months ago, cold and alone, with nothing but a small bag of belongings. Jack knocked on the door, his voice soft. "Libby, are you ready?" She smiled, her heart fluttering. "I think so." He entered, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You look beautiful." Libby felt her cheeks flush, but she couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "Thank you, Jack." As they stood there, staring at one another, a feeling of peace settled over them both. This was right. They were ready for this new chapter in their lives, ready to step into the future hand in hand, bound together by love and mutual respect. The ceremony itself was everything they had both hoped for. The sun hung low in the sky as the preacher spoke words that felt timeless and profound. Surrounded by friends, family, and the ranch hands who had come to respect and admire her, Libby said her vows with all the sincerity she had in her heart. Jack, too, spoke with quiet passion, pledging his love and devotion to her for the rest of their lives. When they exchanged rings, the crowd cheered, and the feeling of joy was palpable. Libby felt like the luckiest woman in the world, standing there with Jack, ready to take on whatever the future had in store for them, together. As the celebration began, the sounds of music, laughter, and dancing filled the air. The men from the ranch gathered around the fire, telling stories and celebrating the union of their boss and his bride. The evening was filled with warmth, love, and a sense of community. And as the night wore on, Jack and Libby shared a quiet moment together, stealing away from the party to stand under the stars. "I love you," Jack whispered, his hand resting on hers. "I love you too, Jack," Libby replied, her voice filled with contentment. "Forever." And with that, the two of them stood together, ready to face the future, knowing that their love would carry them through whatever challenges life might throw their way. The Double T Ranch flourished in the years that followed. Jack and Libby continued to build their life together, creating a home that was filled with love, laughter, and the shared dream they had worked so hard to realize. They grew the ranch, expanding its reach and influence across Wyoming, all while raising a family of their own. Their children grew up surrounded by the land they had fought so hard to protect, and the legacy of Jack and Libby Thornton lived on in everything they did. The ranch was not just a business. It was a symbol of their love and their shared commitment to the land and the people who had become their family. And as they watched the next generation take the reins, Jack and Libby knew that their love story would never be forgotten. It was written in the heart of Wyoming, and it would be passed down through the generations as a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and the belief that anything was possible with the right person by your side. Together, Jack and Libby had built a life beyond their wildest dreams. And they knew without a doubt that their love, forever and always, would endure.